Alu and his Finnish squad beat Nip the other day, and Alu actually out-opt Wrinkle in the head-to-head, and I thought, damn, I remember when Ence used to be good. And then Ence might actually be good again. So what they've built is basically a squad of mostly Academy players, Potty, Natu, and Kaspersky. I think they all came from Academy teams, and they seem to actually be picking things up. Now, to be fair, 9Z has been on a pretty big downturn recently. This result isn't the biggest of deals. However, I mean, you're looking at Ence currently ranked number 69 in the world. Nice. And 9Z is ranked 25 or something. Of course, 9Z, I think, was ranked in the top 15 pretty recently. So, of course, that is a notable downswing. But at the same time, not only did Ence win with a basically a brand new roster, but also they came close against Heroic, right? 2 13-10 losses in a 2-0. Obviously, you want them to pick up a map, but when you have a brand new roster, I think 2 13-10 losses to Heroic, who are basically reverse 9Z, where they're actually kind of starting to look really good recently, I think you can be pretty happy about that. I wanted to look at the Mirage game because I think most people seem to not like Ancient that much. I think it's either the least or the second least played map in Premier, but the demo was not working, so here we are. First buy round, instantly boosted DGT going for the fast play down lane. Now, one of the things the analysts were talking about was that 9Z in their previous match, because they actually played 9Z and Ence in a best of one, and they ended up on Ancient, and they were talking about 9Z not quite playing as aggressive as they needed to be in the previous game, and that should be, in theory, an easy fix. So it's interesting to see them immediately go for something a little aggressive on the very first round. And DGT actually gets that kill. Kind of unfortunate timing for Kaspersky. 3v5. And actually, this is kind of an interesting round because this is 9Z somewhat collapsing on the A bomb site. They've even got DGT who's blocking if they wanted to go backwards. I mean, A on Ancient is relatively hard to hold because there's so few angles you can actually play from. And Natu's nade does a lot of damage, but this is kind of unconfirmed damage at this point. So it's not really in the most winnable of situations. They're just going to have to win some straight up gunfights. And that's exactly what SDY is going to do with an instant kill on a Martinez, and then both remaining players are 20 HP each, and they just don't have that much of a chance for a pretty solid round win for Ence. And I mean, that was, I think, a pretty reasonable call. When you actually look at the way the round went down, they had a lot of really solid chances. They had the lurk out towards B. I mean, Kaspersky probably should be winning that duel against DGT the majority of the time. It was kind of just unlucky timing there, and they were in a relatively strong position, and then everything kind of collapsed. But I think strategically that kind of made sense. And the question, I think, is Glaive going to do a lot better with the new Ence? Now, nobody thinks that the old Ence, the most recent Ence roster, the old Ence, I suppose, is kind of like the 2019 roster. Nobody thinks that Glaive was supposed to win a major or anything with that roster. I think some people have put the expectations a little too high for that roster. However, I think most people will agree that that roster probably had a little more potential than was actually picked up. And I think that can be hard to do for someone like Glaive, who's a lot of his experiences in IGL was playing with literally the best team in the world. And you might be trying to fit, at times, kind of a square peg into a round hole type of idea, right? Where you're trying to build around something that's not necessarily possible, but then you actually look at him pick up some talented academy level players. I think that's what you're really hoping for an IGL like Glaive to work with. I think that's where Glaive can actually get them into his system and get them all on the same page, and because they're individually talented, it can actually go really well. So it will be interesting to see how this roster actually develops, but not speaking too much about this run. Dude, what is this view model? Man, can we all just agree that CS should have, nobody's going to agree with this, have one view model everyone is forced to use? No. Okay, no, nobody's going to agree with that. I think we can all agree we're tired of seeing ridiculous view models like Ime's in the middle of his screen and this stuff that's just way too big. Just use a normal view model, man. Okay, whatever. All right, we're getting off topic. So back to the game. It looks like Ence wanted to try and attack towards the A site, at least a little bit in this game. And you've got Martinez here with an op, but he's on the aggressive side, right? If he's back towards Temple, I think he's pretty safe here. But this aggressively, they have a nice little play to actually draw out the first shot and then make sure they can get the trade to turn it into a pretty decent situation for them. And then Glaive almost looked like he was moving. But this is actually all a distraction. And that's what makes this round really interesting, because you've got this very aggressive play coming out from Glaive and Natu, but then you've got the two players that threw utility for them that actually want to pivot right back towards middle, and you've got Kaspersky taking lane control very quietly. So he's actually going to have the flank on Max. I mean, even if Max got that kill, Kaspersky would have gotten the flank trade on him. The two players come out middle, and now they have the option. If that A play went really well, then I think they had the option to hit A off of that through Donut, and if the A play went poorly, then they have the option to go back towards B. And the A play went relatively well because they got 2 kills for 1, but they didn't get control of the bomb site, so they actually just slow it down entirely. And this is like a standard IGL play where you get into something like a 4v2, and then what you're really looking for is you want to make sure that what your opponents want to do when they get into a 4v2 or a 2v4 is your opponents are going to want to get aggressive and take some map control back. So you hold for a little bit to make sure that when they go for that map control to try and take it back, you have players in position, because your opponents, what they really want to do is they want to catch you in the middle of the open. They want to catch you in transition. Sometimes it does break down just like that, where your opponents go for aggressions that aren't quite where you're ready for them, and then because you waited, they actually catch you in the open. However, there's every belief that if they had gone for something quickly, maybe they still could have been caught in the open. For example, if they had decided to quickly go back to A, maybe they could have been caught with a player a little more ready for them than they were for him. But the idea behind it goes back to, like, I mean, people were doing this even probably in like 2005. Right, in CS 1.6. You get the kills, your opponents want to get aggressive to take that map control back, and you don't allow them to catch you off guard instead of immediately reacting, right? Because if you immediately react off of those kills, then that's when your opponents are ready for you to move. But basically in anti-eco here, you have a little bit of weaponry, specifically out of Max, where he went MP9 and body armor. And this is, of course, what you're seeing very often recently. This type of kind of one player going, not buying all the way down, right? But one player overly investing in the round specifically, and the rest of the team going majorly for a save. Max is doing the standard kind of jiggle in and out with that MP9. And the question is Max their normal cheetah player? If it is normally Max, then Martinez and another player dying, well, then Kaspersky doesn't really have any reason not to expect another player in there. And he was quite ready for an extra player. However, of course, this is like a pistol eco. So you're also thinking, to some extent, this is a round where multiple players might be in there. And actually, this individually, holy crap, this is somehow turned immediately. And if Max had a kit, this would be completely over. With no kit, oh boy. Nice shot by Potty, who is, by the way, if you weren't sure who was opping on this team, I think SDY, didn't he do some opping on a different team? But it's Pody on this team. Pody should be their general opper. Of course, most teams don't. I mean, Ancient's kind of a middle ground. I think there's some pretty reasonable positions to put an opper in on T-side Ancient, but there's definitely some maps where it, like Nuke, for example, Inferno's a great example, where T-side opping isn't all that effective. And one of the things that you're seeing from Ence here, which means you do have to think about what they're going to be able to do against other teams. They are allowing Kaspersky to play quite aggressive and go for plays up ramp here. And of course, you're going to build your play around the team you're playing against, right? And Kaspersky is fighting against Buddha towards B. And Buddha has been talked about recently as potentially the most likely player to be removed for the 9Z squad. Maui Snake actually talked about him on the desk and said he just doesn't crouch, which essentially is saying his movement isn't good enough. Because if you look at, a lot of the meta currently, it's about making yourself very hard to hit, which is great. But if your movement isn't very good and you don't prioritize that, then you can see how that can actually go quite badly unless your aim is really insane. If you just focus on, I don't want to say it's CSGO style, because I think this same thing could be happening in CSGO. There's every reason it could have happened, but realistically, kind of is CSGO style. Interesting play here, though. They throw a bit of a fake towards A. It's a 3v2, and this is the type of play, this is what you want Glaive for. Like a really nice little play there. They throw a bunch of utility towards A. Glaive is lurking through B at the same time, so the pivot comes because they kind of have to move because there's only 2 players, right? They only have 2 players here, and then they just run straight back through T-spawn and make their way back over to B. Now, these types of plays obviously can go wrong if someone is somewhere like Donut and then quickly pivots and tries to fight down here. That play can go wrong, especially because Kaspersky only had 3 HP. But at the same time, CS is a percentages game, right? So everything can go wrong some of the time. You have to accept that as a possibility. That's just one of those plays where when it goes wrong, it's going to look really bad. But I don't think that necessarily makes a play bad in any way, right? The play is either good or bad, even if it looks worse when losing, as long as it's got a decent percentage chance to win. But the smoke off towards Cheetah, they actually have a flash from SDY for Glaive to pop straight through. Well-timed pop through on the mid-smoke at the same exact time as Glaive comes through Shelf, which is exactly what you're looking for. And then Max, by the way, is their Cheetah player. So it does actually make a lot of sense, and that's something that I think teams do take into mind. You have to question whether you want to be making the play the way 9Z did when they had Max up in the corner here and someone baiting for him. Because even in pugs, people notice the name of the player that plays a certain position. They take note of that, right? So if that guy's hiding in a corner, you know, your opponent kills someone else in that position, they're going to be looking for, well, that's not their normal Cheetah player. And you can offset that, absolutely. You can offset that by sometimes playing your Cheetah player somewhere else on that type of eco, right? So maybe if 9Z are super randomized on eco, like sometimes Max plays A, sometimes he plays B, sometimes he plays mid, then it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, it's still going to give you some pause for thought as to whether or not you want to move in. Whereas, of course, I mean, in their defense, you generally don't want to be going into Cheetah that aggressively against pistols or against the half buy to begin with. But that, I don't think it helps when you know that that's their Cheetah player is still alive, right? It's kind of going to make you extra cautious, even though it kind of worked out, right? He did get 3 kills afterwards. That was kind of an individual skill to end with that. But now we've got Martinez 1v1, and he's just got a better angle. I mean, Nate2's in a decent position. I really like the play from Martinez. He kind of holds pretty passively to begin with, holding over here. Then people mess this up in pugs all the time, especially at lower levels. If you're actually going to sit there and watch the left side and you want your opponent to respect that you could be going a different direction, you actually have to give them enough time where you could be going the other direction, right? You can't just wait holding the left side for 3 seconds and then go. You actually have to hold it. Well, 3 seconds might be almost enough time, but you can't just like hold it for a second and then go. People do this on like Nuke all the time, or in clutches all the time, where they want their opponent to think that they could be coming from a different position, so they go silent, but then they don't go silent for nearly long enough. Like if you have to rotate from one side of the map to the entire other side, you have to wait 15, 20 seconds for how long it would actually take you, right? You can't just immediately move. Well, Martinez waited that little bit of time, and that's the key to making your opponent actually worry about that play. Although, of course, some people just get worried about those types of plays immediately and don't realize that time is a thing that exists, potentially even a dimension. Listen, okay, this is okay. Moving on. Heinze are getting kind of suffocated here in terms of control of the map. I mean, you're down 7-1 on CT side of Ancient. You're probably not feeling too great, and you want to be trying to look to change things up. And they're just kind of slowly losing control of everything. They don't have great control of Cheetah. And I mean, this is credit to the way that Ence are playing, right? I think Ence isn't really giving almost any opportunities for something to be going their way. They're smoking off Cheetah to begin with. They're generally, of course, when it comes to Ancient, you control mid early as a CT, but usually at a certain point as a CT, you do have to kind of give up that control and give it back. Man, Wasso Peak, wow. Okay. 2v2. Only problem, he's kind of trapped in sight, but is he trapped or is Potty trapped in there with him? Okay. Then it's SDY 1v2. He's only got 10. Oh my god. Okay. All right. That was almost went both directions. That was another really solid play from Ence, though, by the way. I mean, that was, of course, there was an opening for that type of play to happen by Wasso Peak, but at the same time, Wasso Peak had to get the right timing to be in position for that type of play to happen, and he had to hit some really nice shots. And I think the reality is, when it comes to riflers, there's almost always going to be a possibility of them multi-fragging if they hit some really nice shots. I think Ence had some pretty decent spacing there to make that hard to happen, although not impossible. But now we have, if you keep in mind, because Ence was playing quite slow in a lot of their other rounds and keeping it quite quiet on in middle and towards B, and just kind of popping out when they had the timing to pop out, then when they go for this slow play towards A, it's not quite as obvious that they're doing it. Now, it's still kind of, you know, it seemed like 9Z had some idea that play was potentially happening, but, I mean, yeah, Wasso Peak kind of has to peek out there. I think what Wasso Peak was doing there was he had a teammate that was kind of moving into position to cover that, and then he wanted his teammates to activate towards Donut before he actually peeked out there, but that's the exact problem with that exact play is someone's going to come around that box behind you, and you probably just have to do it slightly early off of a flash, slightly earlier off of a flash or some other team contact. But you could see 9Z had some idea that that play was coming out from Ence, right? They were looking for that play to some extent. However, they weren't like completely ready for it the way they might be if Ence was a little bit more aggressive on their normal, you know, default style rounds. If Ence was a little bit more aggressive and they were having people spam the wall and they were having, you know, all this other type of stuff happening all the time. You can see how Kaspersky's going here. All I'm saying is that they're intelligently setting up a pacing and format for the rest of their half, right? It kind of all comes out of the same style of opening, or much of it comes out of the same style of opening for it to work effectively, to throw fakes and delays and all those types of things. Ence into the 3v4, and I think we have to accept that individually Ence seems to be getting the better of 9Z for the majority of this game and the series as well. You know, they're in some not the greatest positions at times, and they're still fragging their way out of it. Now, I don't think I mean, it's right. It's ancient, right? You're on T side. You're going to be in not the greatest of positions some of the time, and there's really nothing you can actually do about that. So I don't think it's unreasonable at all. I don't think it's like a bad calling situation to be in these spots, but they shouldn't really be up 8-2. I think if we're talking about like they're not getting outplayed to that extent. But when are you ever on CT side ancient? That requires some special situations, circumstances, you might even say. SDY nading out the smoke, gets a free kill while doing so, says, thank you, I'll take that. Turns it into a 2v2, boot on the rotate. Just walks right into the angle. I mean, you know SDY could be there. I don't think that's like, you have to clear it somehow, right? But this is an angle, I think, where you might be looking for someone to do something like a crouch peek or like a jiggle or something instead of walking straight into the angle, because if SDY is in that position that he's in, which is not that uncommon, then you do make the shot essentially as easy as possible for him there. Rather than making it slightly harder. But I mean, at some point you end up nitpicking, because if he's just a little bit faster there's a decent chance that he can, you know, maybe still find that kill. Then Max 1v2, doesn't even have a kit, so he's kind of screwed here. I mean, there was no way he was just going to be sticking that for 10 seconds to begin with two players there. So at that point, he may as well honestly have gone to save as soon as he got into the bomb site and didn't find someone, like, because he looked around for someone initially, kind of at the very beginning, didn't find anybody, and then by the time he got to the bomb, I think there was just no winning that round, you know? And then he tried to do economic damage, but you're already down 8-2. The economic damage isn't going to be that great when you're down 9-2, and it's the last round of the game. So I have to think he probably should have just backed up and saved the AK. But at the same time, he might have been thinking the other T was in Donut, and so he might be thinking, well, if I can't exit Donut because there could be another player there, and then I'm fucked anyways, so he goes for it. But still, would have been nice to have an AK. Okay, then if you look at the bottom of your screen here, you're going to see there was a bit of a delay. There was a slight delay, maybe perhaps about as long as the entire game was delay. Technical delay. I don't know exactly what it went for, but, you know, in a technical delay, I do wonder if they actually allow teams to go out and, like, talk at that point when the delay is that long. But I think the answer is no. I think the answer is no, they don't allow teams to actually do anything but sit still, staring at their computer screen, fucking meditating during a technical pause. At a certain point, surely, if imagine a 12-hour technical pause, okay? It could happen. You never know. All right, whatever. SUI had the best spawn. He did. So I saw Yakindar get so much hate for this on Inferno for Liquid a few days ago, or maybe a week ago. He went up top banana, he got blinded, he took like 4 or 5 shots, thought he got the kill, and then started moving forward. But he didn't get the kill, and it looked really, really, really bad. This stuff happens all the time, man. I mean, I don't okay, to some extent, I think Yekindar thinking he got that kill, being that confident, and then moving on when the guy could have just dropped off of Sandbag, which is very common, was a little ridiculous. But at the same time, I feel like people were overselling how bad it was, because this stuff happens all the time. You just think you got the kill, 9 times out of 10 you get the kill in that situation, but your recoil control is slightly off because you were blind or something like that, and you just don't have it, But unfortunately for SDY, it happened to him this time, although it didn't look nearly as egregious because he's in such an awkward situation there to begin with. But then we've got another 3v4, and you'll notice, by the way, that off a technical pause like that, they all just went for something aggressive. There was the A main push, which is where kills got traded. There's the mid play where SDY was running straight out middle. Both teams went for something super aggressive at the same time, and it ended up basically going 9Z's way, but that's kind of to be expected off the back of a pause. It seems like that's what the majority of teams are going for. It's just a question of where and when they're going to be doing it, because you kind of want to catch your opponents off guard where they're not just quite ready for the play that you're making. 2v3. This time around, Nate is going to have to deal with that A main play. Well, actually now I thought Martinez was coming through house. It was going to get heard. But Nate, you can't get the plant, so round's basically over. And we've got a 9-3 half. To some extent, when it comes down to it, when you have a 9-3 half on T-side Ancient, one team showed up and the other team didn't. But at the same time, I think Ence, 9Z had some pretty solid individual plays. This is a very interesting setup, by the way. They're just Glaive is just sitting here waiting to throw a flash. They're just waiting to rotate off of who makes contact, whether it's B or A. They're just waiting to triple rotate and get into position. But anyways, I think 9Z, it's not like they didn't show up entirely. They had some pretty incredible rounds from Wasso Peak. Max had a really strong round as well. I think when it comes down to it, Ence had a really solid game plan, and their players were absolutely hitting some shots, right? But I think Ence really had a solid game plan to begin with. And Glaive, oh god, this is the nightmare of nightmares is when that type of thing happens. Dude, shooting people in the back of the head with a USP has to be. I would rather uninstall the game. I swear to God, I set myself up so I'll never be in those situations. I'm like, if someone's dead watching this, and I have the displeasure of trying to shoot someone in the back as they don't know I'm there with the USB, I would rather have just died at the beginning of the round. That shit is not going my way at all. Nice little anti-eco from 9Z. And because they went 5 for 0, especially because they already had some Galils they started with the Galils, they have a reasonably solid buy into the first gun round. The question is always do you even want this necessarily? Because you are taking away, if you think about it, your best chance to win round 3 is removed because you're trying to hold on to some guns. Now, I think if you have 2 MAC-10s, then you're really thinking about just upgrading both of them to AKs. You have 1 MAC-10, 3 Galils. I think you're obligated to sit with that. But I think it is an interesting concept to think about, which is when the CTs buy on round 3, they're not really going to have the best buy of all time, right? You've got Kaspersky with an MP9, Glaive had an MP9, and the guys that have M4s, if they didn't get any kills, especially the guys that have M4s just simply don't have good utility, right? So you are to some extent losing a little bit of win rate on that round so that you can buy up in the following round. But if you do buy up in the following round, actually, I kind of take it back a little bit, all right? Because if you do buy in the following round, most likely you did get some kills in the current round. So your opponents shouldn't have the greatest buy of all time ever, or anyways, either way. But it does just suck. That's really what I'm getting at here. It's just we have such a good chance to win this round, and then we're really going to go into this round. Well, I'm talking about if you have two MAC-10s, I think you probably buy AKs. No, maybe. Well, it depends on the map. I think most maps there's a play you can make with those MAC-10s that'll be fine. But it's interesting to think about. The situation you have now is exactly what I was saying, why I said I took it back. Because you still got 2 MP9s, although the rifles do have slightly better utility, right? Natu, Potty, and SDY do have I think they started the round with pretty much full utility. Of course, you don't have full guns, and that can lead to something like that, where Buddha just gets the insta-kill on a Kaspersky. And then the question is, I'm interested to see how Ence actually react to that, because Ash actually put out a really solid video talking about a lot of what I talk about in these videos, where like proactivity coming out of CTs, but it was kind of done with a nice little bow on top, and it was like well edited, and he kind of discussed them, the topics in a really good way. And he was talking about Navi's proactivity and how they react to losing players, or they react to losing map control, those types of things. And they're very fast and very active throughout the map to force their opponents to make a lot of choices and decisions. And in doing so, your opponents are going to make a lot of mistakes, right? And so I'm interested to see how that develops on a team like Ence, where you have a lot of young players that are kind of more newly put onto a roster, how you can try and actually work on that. And usually it seems like the answer is that they play a little bit more passive or kind of individually aggressive, as opposed to what we see from Na'Vi, which is kind of very coordinated team aggression, you know? So you might even call those, you know, if you do individualized aggressions, those are microaggressions. I've heard of those before. Have you? And then if you do... If you do it as a team, those are macro aggressions. Those are, I haven't heard of those before. That's crazy. That's new. All right, fast forward past 2 kills, which is actually pretty impactful in a situation like this, because although the economy on the T side, it's easier to build, and it feels a little bit less worse when you survive with only 1 player on a round win, it's still not good, right? You still have a Mac 10, 2 Galils, not full utility. It's kind of like the round 3 buy from Ence, except it's happening on round 17. Initially kills, I mean, as the T side goes, this is looking pretty good for 9Z, and this is kind of a continuation of the first half, where 9Z was putting themselves into a pretty, like, relatively good positions in terms of being up members into the mid round. But I really like this play from Ence, where they actually do just group up 3 players towards middle. They lost the control initially, so they go for the regroup, and then they boost Kaspersky up so he can take what is a pretty aggressive engagement, but he can have a slight advantage in doing so. Then the question is this on Kaspersky landing some nice shots here, or is this really on 9Z for the trading? And I almost want to put, I mean, Kaspersky didn't hit any insane shot there. It's not like he insta-gibbed anybody. He has an M4A1S at very long range. They knew he was there. Was anything there he did better than, you would say, like baseball has the term like wins above replacement? If you put a random like average level pro in that situation, is he getting 2 kills there? I think he probably is. Which at that point you either have to say that he got lucky, which I don't think is the case, or that 9Z may have messed something up there slightly. Unfortunately, Max kind of swung directly into the line of fire while having 30 HP, which just made it really unfortunate, right? It just kind of screwed everything up. And that's really the swing round. I mean, if you want to think about it, probably the biggest swing round was that, 10-6. So instead of being 3 rounds away, they're now like a lot of rounds away. Right? And not only that, but they're on eco. So instead of being, it's about to be 12-6, I assume, instead of being 12-6, it could be 10-8, right? And this game would be within reaching distance. Now, again, this is 9-0 on T side of Ancient, so reaching distance is suspect. It's hard to call it reaching distance, given that reality. It's like, if you have tie game on and you're on T side of Nuke, are you really feeling that good about it? Probably not, you know, 8-8, 10-10. Like, yeah, you could come back, but it's not like you're feeling like you're really on even footing. You're still at a slight disadvantage, but you do end up having kind of the momentum in your favor, and you have a chance to get some things done. Now, the question here, by the way, can they see his gun here? No, Glaive is intentionally in a position, I think, where his gun... Is this gun buddy is moving every time I change characters. Every time I change players, right? It's not just always moving. I hate this. I hate this so much. And it's got a shadow. You see that shadow on the gun? Oh my God. This is the worst thing to ever happen to... Okay, it's not the worst thing to ever happen to CS. Maui Snake would say that skins are the worst thing to ever happen to CS. But man, these gun buddies are mighty annoying. All right, Glaive was intentionally in a position where he wouldn't be spotted by the T's coming through house. And in doing so, by the way, you make it highly unlikely that your opponent's going to expect you there. Because generally, if someone's playing there and they're not thinking about the possibility of getting flanked from house, they're just going to be visible, right? If they're in that position. So you're kind of going to discount that as a potential. I think when it comes to 9Z, though, I don't think they really get much opportunity to actually flesh out a T side in this game. They kind of just have what is a very weak CT side, although not weak to the point that I think individually it felt like they were showing up. I think Ence just had a really good game plan, and they had some players landing some shots, and I think they had some really good calls. People think I'm a Glaive hater, okay? I'm not a Glaive hater. I just don't think he's the GOAT IGL personally, because I think I rate highly the ability to work with multiple rosters. I still think Glaive was perfect for Astralis. I'm not a Glaive hater, and I think you have to accept that he made some pretty fucking good calls in this game, and I think he hit some shots that a lot of IGLs wouldn't. And I think that's a reasonable thing to say. But 9Z didn't really get a chance on their T side, and if they had won that one round, which potentially they would have won if not for kind of just a bad trading situation on that play towards lane, then that game actually could really reasonably have gone their way, despite the fact that a 13-6 does indicate that it's a pretty one-sided game.